And frankly, Joy, if you want to know the truth, when I talk to my colleagues at the congressional gym, when I talk to them in line at the Dunkin' Donuts in the Longworth building, they're laughing at these nominees. They think it's a joke. They're embarrassed. And again, I'm embarrassed for the American people who thought that bringing Donald Trump into power was going to serve them. It's just serving him.
Reminder, Iran is our #1 sponsor of terrorism. And Tulsi Gabbard was defending Iran. She said that Donald Trump turned the U.S. into Saudi Arabia's prostitute. DNI, Department of National Intelligence. This is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer.
Not that Donald Trump would ever actually work a day in his life, but he's currently reaping exactly what he sowed, as the discord from his clown car posse of cabinet appointments and his treasonous intentions for using the military on American citizens has caused some Republicans to grow just the tiniest vertebra of a spine and backstab him with regard to his concepts of disastrous policy and personnel decisions. Senator Rand Paul lambasted Trump's plan to declare an emergency, turning the U.S. military on citizens to deport migrants. Nikki Haley trashed Trump's appointment of Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, and others still have been going so far as to mock Trump for his selection of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, while growing calls for the release of his damning House ethics report seem to be coming from inside the House.
To release that report, would you vote to release that report?
I think it's very important that everybody has as much knowledge as possible so that they can make an informed decision.
And before we get into Republicans directly trashing Trump, I want to start here with an interview that Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell did today with CNN, where he really gets to the heart of the controversy surrounding Matt Gaetz in a way that I think sums it up better than anyone else has.
They're hiding something. Like where I come from, if there's a report about somebody's misconduct and there's a gang that's trying to keep it from coming out, most people in America, in any cafe, any bar, any church that I go to would be like, what are you hiding?
Because they didn't think a jury would find some of this testimony credible. A lot of Republicans we have spoken to have pointed to that, saying that this is evidence that there was no wrongdoing. Do you think that this is just a smear campaign then?
No, this is about his ability to be America's top law enforcement officer. And what I'm saying is, when you destroy evidence or you hide evidence in a court of law, the judge will say, you can use that to infer somebody's guilty, because only somebody who's guilty would want to destroy evidence. And so the reason Republicans are trying to destroy this evidence or hide the ball is because they don't want the very concerning conduct to come out. And so the American people are just going to draw their own conclusion that America's top law enforcement official has some very concerning things that are being hidden from us. And Donald Trump won the election, promised transparency. I will credit him. Congratulations, you won the election. Now show the American people the transparency that you promised during the campaign, because this doesn't look, to me and most people that I know, like a transparent process.
Right, you can't run on draining the swamp and then appoint the literal human embodiment of a swamp monster as your Attorney General. And the problem with Matt Gaetz is less about what he did or didn't do, though based on the despicable things we've seen already, you'd think even the allegations of being at a drug-fueled party with minors would be enough to question someone's integrity, but it's more about the top law enforcement official lacking that integrity and accountability altogether.
I actually think the report is a little bit of a distraction about the real issues with Matt Gaetz, which is that he is going to go in and politically punish Donald Trump's perceived enemies. And he's going to do all of that work at the cost of us not investigating money laundering, corruption, counterterrorism, counterintelligence issues, because he's just going to be a lapdog for Donald Trump. And he's actually told us that's what he's going to do. This report, again, undermines his ability to be taken seriously by the people who are going to work for him and the American people who need to trust him. But the bigger issues, and this is not what I'm telling you, my Republican friends in Congress are laughing that he is the appointee, and no one actually thinks that he's going to be confirmed. That's a disservice to the millions of Americans who voted for Donald Trump, wanted to see him come in and be their voice, take seriously the cost of eggs, the cost of milk, take seriously issues we have at our southern border and security that people want in their communities. And they see this clown being appointed and they're like, this isn't what we voted for. This isn't the mandate that we gave you that he believes that he has.
And Swalwell is absolutely right. Fundamentally, Trump's picks are not going to have credibility with the American people. Maybe with your average Twitter user incel who gets his news from Don Jr.'s Rumble channel, but certainly not with the almost 250 million people who didn't vote for Donald Trump. Which brings us to our first and unsurprising Donald Trump backstabber of the day, Nikki Haley, who went on a tear against most of Trump's picks, including Gaetz, RFK Jr., but most notably, trashing his pick of Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. Take a listen.
She said that Donald Trump turned the U.S. into Saudi Arabia's prostitute. This is going to be the future head of our national intelligence. In Congress, Tulsi criticized Trump's authoritarian strike against Qasem Soleimani. Now, I will remind you, he was considered the master of death in Iran. She said he had no justification whatsoever for killing him. She tried to limit Trump's war powers against Iran. She tried to cut our annual defense budget so that we couldn't punish Iran and hinder their influence. Reminder, Iran is our #1 sponsor of terrorism, and Tulsi Gabbard was defending Iran. She went to Syria in 2017 for a photo op with Bashar al-Assad while he was massacring his own people. She said she was skeptical that he was behind the chemical weapons attacks. Now, this to me is disgusting because, Cheney, you and I were at the United Nations when Assad did those chemical attacks on those children. Yep. And you can go back and look at a speech I gave holding up pictures of dead children who had been killed by chemical attacks.
Nope, choked to death.
For her to say that Assad was not behind that, literally everything she said about that were Russian talking points. Every bit of that. That was Russian propaganda. After Russia invaded Ukraine, Tulsi Gabbard literally blamed NATO. Our Western alliance that's responsible for countering Russia, she blamed NATO for the attack on Ukraine. And the Russians and the Chinese echoed her talking points and her interviews on Russian and Chinese television. She called for Trump to end the destructive trade war with China. So now she's defended Russia, she's defended Syria, she's defended Iran, and she's defended China. Now, she has not denounced any of these views. None of them. She hasn't taken one of them back. DNI, Department of National Intelligence. This is not a place for a Russian, Iranian, Syrian, Chinese sympathizer.
And as if that wasn't enough evidence that Trump's appointments, policy plans, and general ideology aren't inherently anti-American, here is backstabber number 2, Senator Rand Paul, talking about he would not support Trump's plan to unleash the military on American citizens in order to mass deport immigrants and wreck the economy.
I'm not in favor of sending the army in uniforms into our cities to collect people. I think it's a terrible image, and that's not what we use our military for. We never have, and it's actually been illegal for over 100 years to bring the army into our cities. Army and our military are trained to shoot the enemy. They're not trained to get a warrant to do what they're doing. The police have a difficult job, but the people removing people from our country need to be a police enforcement domestic agency, not the military. While I'm all for remain in Mexico, I will not support an emergency to put the army into our cities. I think that's a huge mistake.
Yeah, and I think this is a huge mistake should be the slogan for Trump's presidency. And as much as I vehemently disagree with most of these Republicans, at least they are outwardly trying to counter his own worst impulses and stab him in the back. But what then happens when that opposition becomes merely another part of the enemies within? Because apparently, the only thing protecting American democracy at this point is whether or not Trump's fragile brain and even more fragile ego will force him to stop making terrible decisions because he's being laughed at.
They're laughing at these nominees. They think it's a joke. They're embarrassed.
Here's hoping baby man's broken brain and ego are more of a hindrance to him than the American people. For Really American, I'm Kenny Hesse, and I'll see you all in the next one.